Women are 100% different than men. We're not small men. We are very complex biological creatures. Women have all these fluctuations that are happening because a woman's body is designed to reproduce another human. So the body is constantly taking a survey at every single moment to say, is this a good time for reproduction? And if it's not a good time for reproduction, it will shut down the system. You're asking the question like, should women add carbs in? Should we carb cycle? How many carbs does a woman need compared to a man, even if he was the same size? A lot of people ask, when am I keto adapted? Or like, how do I know, right? And you don't know. You just have to stick with it for a period of time. And like I said, it could be weeks to months. Now, after you have kind of gotten through this adaptation phase is when I do think that metabolic flexibility plays a role, especially for women, because the body is very smart and the body is very adaptive.
Hey there, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and today's episode is actually a re-release of an episode that came out back in the day when MetFlex and Chill first launched. It is with my good friend, Dr. Jaime Seeman. And the reason why I'm re-releasing this episode is because we chatted about so much information in this particular episode related to nutrition during pregnancy and breastfeeding. We talked about the difference between keto for women versus men. We dove into menstrual cycle complications, or not complications, but considerations, especially when it comes to keto and introducing carbs and having carb ups and things like that. We talked about the importance of building muscle for women. We talked about fat loss for women, especially if you're in the perimenopausal or menopausal stage of your life. And then we also dove into birth control and chatted all about different birth control side effects and alternatives. So this episode was, again, it was just jam-packed with so much information that I felt with all the new listeners we have now. And even if you heard this podcast episode like a year ago, I feel like you'll still benefit from hearing this information again or for the first time. So that is the reason that we're re-releasing it. And just to give you a quick background on Dr. Jaime Seeman, if you don't know her, she is a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist practicing in Omaha, Nebraska. After overcoming her own health struggles and a personal tragedy in 2015, she started her consulting business, Dr. Fit and Fabulous, with a mission to change the face of preventative healthcare and inspire other moms just like her to live their healthiest lives. Dr. Seeman has been a driving force in changing the landscape of healthcare in this country. And in 2020, she was actually crowned Mrs. Nebraska and also competed on the NBC Titan Games with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, placing in the top 6. So Dr. Jaime Seeman is just an inspiration for so many women, and I look up to her as a mentor myself, and she is just a wealth of knowledge. So again, I'm excited to reshare it with you, and I know you're going to benefit from it. All right, let's jump into the episode with Dr. Jaime Seeman. All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. I'm here with a badass woman, Dr. Jaime Seeman, aka Dr. Fit and Fabulous. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on. I can't wait to chat about all the things. And I noticed you have this super cool trophy in the background.
Yes, these gals get to make all of their appearances in my online lives and podcasts. So these are my Lifter of the Year trophies from Nebraska, and they're large and obnoxious. They are not, of course, people who can't see this video, you can't see them, but they're not a gold cast of my body. They are just some strong, obnoxiously strong woman. And I have 2 of them, and I don't know where else to put them in my house except right there. So you all get to enjoy them.
That's awesome. Yeah. If you're listening to this, you won't see it, but if you're watching on YouTube, obviously you'll see. Awesome. So why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about your background, how you kind of got to where you are in your kind of nutrition and fitness life right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Jaime Seeman. I'm a board certified obstetrician and gynecologist. So in my day-to-day job, I work in private practice. I deliver babies and do surgery, and I take care of women for primary care needs. But I also have a very special interest in nutrition and ketogenic therapies in my practice. I have a background in nutrition and exercise science before I ever became a doctor. So it's a little bit different than some of my colleagues. And just this year became a board certified ketogenic nutrition specialist. But it's really funny how I ever ended up in this space, because I kind of came in on a very personal level. And then as a medical provider, it's just kind of blown up into what it is today. So I run a business, Dr. Fit and Fabulous, which, like I said, happened like by mistake one night on my couch at 8 p.m. Never knowing what I would really do, with it. But basically my story is that I grew up as a multi-sport athlete, and by playing sports, I was able to get away with eating really poorly. You'd think most athletes eat really healthy, right? But I was so active as a kid that I ate pretty poorly. And then I went to college. I played softball for the University of Nebraska, where I got my nutrition and exercise science degree. And of course, had access to all these amazing nutritionists. And I did clean up my diet a little bit at the training table in college. But then I left college, and at that point, I was very just burnt out with athletics and weightlifting, and I just was ready to do something different. So I went to medical school, and that was a huge shift in my life, to suddenly be very sedentary, studying for long hours and not eating great again. And then my husband and I decided to pursue our first pregnancy. So I got pregnant with my first daughter as a medical student, and then went on to have 2 more pregnancies pretty quickly. So I had basically had 3 pregnancies in 60 months. And as an OB-GYN, if you want to have the greatest physiologic test of your health, you should try to grow a human inside your body. I failed all of my glucose testing during my pregnancies, gained more weight than I would ever tell my patients to gain. And then shortly after my third daughter was born, was diagnosed with prediabetes, and I had been diagnosed with hypothyroidism in my pregnancies, and had kind of a major tragedy happen in my life. I lost one of my best friends, and it was just a very pivotal moment in my life where I decided that I was going to live my life with a different purpose and a different passion, because I just didn't know how long I was going to be alive. It was just this sudden kind of dose of like mortality. And I found out I had prediabetes. I knew from my family history that there was diabetes in my family. My own father's a type 2 diabetic, but like normal BMI. So really bad insulin resistant genes. And that's the thing, is if you look at me, a picture of me, of course, everyone knows what I look like now, but if you look at a picture, I wasn't morbidly obese. I didn't have a lot of other health problems, but on the inside, you never know what's going on unless you test. And here I was, a medical doctor with a nutrition degree, and I had prediabetes, right? So I'm like the worst billboard for healthy pregnancy at this point. So I kind of started with more of like a Whole30 approach, and then a paleo approach. And my husband and I eventually settled on a ketogenic diet, which to this day, for anybody listening, which was like early 2020, I'm kind of what I call carnivore-ish. So very heavy animal nutrient dense diet, but I do eat plants because my gut tolerates them fine. And it's really just what works best for me. And my health has never been better. My hemoglobin A1C is 4.9. I've been off thyroid medicines for like 2.5 years now. And now I'm really just on a crusade to fix pregnancy nutrition, to fix nutrition for women, because I know that there is another woman out there right now that is busy, and she has 3 small kids just like me, and she's stuck in this rut in her life. And she just thinks that it's okay to be tired and to feel this way. And it's not. When you put the right fuel inside your body, it's amazing what you can get out of it. And I talk about this on every podcast I go on. It's so funny. It started with changing my diet, but it literally changed every part of my life. It changed my marriage. It changed the way I mother. It changed my role as a doctor. It literally changed everything for me.
Yeah, that is amazing. I think that it goes back to kind of like your whole story is so inspiring, and it kind of lines up a little bit with like what I went through with my transformation last year. It's just kind of the nutrition is a huge piece of it, but it's also like the confidence part. So when you start to feel better, you start to do better. And it's like you said, like it bleeds into every other aspect of your life. So I'm sure like during, when you weren't during your pregnancies and when you weren't feeling as healthy, like you weren't feeling as confident and I'm not saying that you weren't feeling confident, but I'm just saying like in general,
Right.
most people don't, when they don't, feel like they don't feel good in their own body, they just don't, other things are going on. The confidence is just like diminished. Right. And so that bleeds into every other aspect of your life. So once you can kind of take control of that, it changes everything. And that's something that I went through like a year and a half ago, and it like completely just overhauled everything. And that's kind of like what my mission is to help people just become confident badasses. And I know that you are on the same mission, especially for women. So I love like chatting with you. But yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's super inspirational. And I think that a lot of our listeners are probably kind of, some of them are in the same boat, or especially women who I work with on a daily basis have experienced a lot of these things. And when, in particular, when it comes to like pregnancy and things like that, I always get the question from like, whether it's on social media or through email, like, is keto or low carb safe for pregnant and breastfeeding women? And it's like, I get that question all the time. So what's kind of well, we kind of know you're taking out, but why would like following a ketogenic or a low carb diet kind of be one, safe for a pregnant woman, and potentially following a low carb diet be maybe optimal for pregnancy?
Yeah. So this is like $1 million question with pregnancy, because everybody is terrified to tell a pregnant woman to sit the wrong way or eat the wrong way, right? Because she has this small human inside of her belly. But in medicine, we have this saying that's do no harm, right? So we always, when we're making recommendations to a pregnancy or to any patient, it's first do no harm. And the current recommendations that we have in pregnancy, I think, are doing a lot of harm to a lot of people. So I think that, yes, traditionally, we don't have a lot of data. We will never have randomized control trials because it's unethical to take a pregnant woman and tell her to eat 0 carbs, and we're just going to see what happens to your baby, right? So we have limited data, but then I have these women right here in my community. They're sitting right across the table from me, and they're like, listen, I've been eating low carb ketogenic. I feel amazing. I'm pregnant. Why can't I continue to eat this way? Right. So I, really started digging into the literature and looking at, what do the numbers show? And pregnancy nutrition is a big deal because excessive weight gain in pregnancy increases the risk of gestational diabetes, hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, which are the 2 things that cause a lot of morbidity and mortality for pregnant women in the United States. And it can change the way that baby gets delivered. So we're seeing increasing amounts of C-sections across the United States, which come with a lot of other implications. And it's due to increase in average fetal birth weights. So this is a big deal. Maternal nutrition is a huge deal, and we cannot step back from it because we're afraid to tell pregnant women, to do X, Y, or Z. It also matters for the baby because there are some large trials showing that what a mom eats in pregnancy has influence on her baby's DNA through epigenetic influences. It may change the gestational age at which she delivers her baby. And it may increase that baby's lifetime risk of things like obesity and insulin resistance if she cannot keep blood sugars normal in pregnancy. So I want to talk a little bit about what are the adaptations that are happening in pregnancy, and for the people listening, making a case that we really may need less carbs than what the current recommendations are. So there are hormonal adaptations that happen when a woman gets pregnant. And this is the body's physiologic response to growing this other human. The body's job is to perpetuate that mom's DNA until the end of time. So it wants to keep this baby alive. It wants to give this baby unlimited amounts of fuel to grow. And so it creates an organ called the placenta, which increases insulin resistance in pregnancy, but the placenta doesn't develop for a little while. So as soon as that pregnant woman gets that positive pregnancy test, we start seeing an increase in insulin production from the pancreas, almost like a 30% increase immediately. There's a lower threshold at which insulin production also happens. So when you eat a cookie, pregnant versus not pregnant, there's a different response that's happening inside the body. The first part of pregnancy is largely anabolic. So anabolic means to grow. So the idea is that the mom is going to store a bunch of energy so that she can use it later in pregnancy. So the first trimester is extremely anabolic. we see the fat cells start to grow and hypertrophy, more fat cells that get larger. And the mom starts storing more glycogen in the liver. The liver literally physically gets larger in pregnancy because it's storing more glycogen. Okay. So tons of fuel storage that's going on in the first trimester. But there is a slight increase in insulin sensitivity in the first trimester. So in the first trimester, when the mom feels horrible and she's experiencing nausea, probably from crazy blood sugar fluctuations and the rising HCG hormone, it's not the time where I'm hammering on them to eat lower carbs, eat lower carbs, eat lower carbs. Even my most carnivore of patients in the first trimester are like, doc, this is crazy. I don't get it. I swear all I can eat is like a cracker right now. And sometimes the first trimester is literally just survival for these women. And trust me, if ketosis killed pregnancies, we wouldn't see many women in the second trimester because there are some women that experience horrible nausea and vomiting and food aversions in the first trimester, but that's not the time to worry about insulin resistance. Okay, so then let's talk what happens in the second half of pregnancy, because this is where carbs really, really matter in the diet. The second half of pregnancy is largely catabolic, which means the body is breaking down. And the body is doing that because it is trying to shunt both glucose and fat to this growing baby. So we have two fuels out in the bloodstream, and both those fuels are flowing all over the body. We also see ketones in the bloodstream. So we basically have every fuel source out in the bloodstream at that baby's disposal. We start to see a decrease in insulin sensitivity, and this is for a very specific physiologic reason. The hormones of the placenta start to increase. The placenta gets larger. The mom's leptin starts to increase, which is our hunger hormone. And that basically keeps the mom wanting to eat food. So, right, this idea of pregnancy cravings, right? Your leptin is like, your leptin's flowing, your leptin resistance is flowing. So you can just like keep eating and eating and eating, but you have insulin resistance going on. So that's a bad idea if you're somebody like me who is eating half-price Sonic milkshakes and Reese's Puffs at night. So, but it helps to maintain the maternal appetite. So we have gluconeogenesis going on. We're breaking down the fat cells, but we have these ketones available in the bloodstream. And this is a very normal adaptation. But let me talk about why it can be a really bad thing for a lot of people. The baby does start to adapt to what's going on in the mom's bloodstream. So if the mom is eating excessive amounts of carbohydrates in the second half of pregnancy and her blood sugars are really high, that glucose is crossing the placenta. And what happens is the fetal pancreas starts to make its own insulin at about 12 weeks. So the more glucose you're showing that baby's ramping up its own insulin production to keep up with that excessive amount of glucose. And the baby's getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And then when it's born and you cut that umbilical cord and that baby doesn't start eating immediately, and it doesn't know how to utilize ketones, it can drop its blood sugar really low. It can get electrolyte disturbances, and it can end up in the NICU. So neonatal hypoglycemia or neonatal low blood sugars is a common reason for NICU admissions, and it is caused by hyperinsulinemia in the mom and in the baby. So it's a big deal because glucose does cross the placenta, but insulin doesn't. So that baby has to deal with the ramifications of mom's bad habits if she's drinking milkshakes and eating a lot of cereal. So this placenta is basically team fetus. This placenta's job is to steal all these nutrients for the baby, but it doesn't really care about the mom. So then after the birth and the placenta is delivered, moms have to return to normal physiology, and people who have blood sugar disturbances in pregnancy are at a majorly increased risk of developing insulin resistance postpartum and in their lifetime. And that's a big deal because we are finding out that hyperinsulinemia is the driver of pretty much every metabolic disease. You talk about the brain, you talk about heart disease, hyperinsulinemia is a bad deal. So let's talk about how a mom should eat in pregnancy. So really, we have 3 macronutrients to choose from: fat, protein, and carbs. When we look at the recommendations currently in pregnancy, the Institute of Medicine says that there's no defined intake level at which potential adverse effects of total fat were identified. So basically, we've never seen a pregnant woman that's eaten too much fat and there was adverse outcomes to the pregnancy. But fat is super important in pregnancy because our sex hormones are literally made from cholesterol. And Fat is super important for the baby's brain development.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very trimester specific. So of course, as the pregnancy progresses, we need more calories and more nutrients for this growing baby. And then there's protein. Women are just historically bad at eating protein to begin with. And so in pregnancy, our protein needs actually increase. So you take somebody that's not used to eating meat, you make them pregnant, and protein deficiency could be a really bad deal in pregnancy. So once again, trimester specific, you need about 1.2 grams per kilogram per day in the first trimester and 1.6 grams per kilogram per day in second and third trimester. But the Institute of Medicine, once again, has said that there's no defined intake level at which adverse effects have been identified with protein intake. So we have no upper limit of fat and protein that you can eat, and it would cause harm to a baby or to a mom. But let's talk about carbohydrates, right? This is the one that everyone's afraid to tell pregnant women, to eat low carb. But what we do know is eating excessive carbohydrates causes hyperinsulinemia. It increases the rates of gestational diabetes and preeclampsia, and can cause adverse health outcomes for that baby, right? Forever and ever and ever, for generations to come. And the Institute of Medicine says that the lower limit of dietary carbs that are compatible with life is basically 0 as long as you eat enough fat and protein. So why are we afraid to tell pregnant women to eat low carb? So there's a couple studies. So let's look at what studies there really are. So they have this recommendation that pregnant women should eat 175 carbs per day. They came up with that number because they looked at the number of carbs that a human needs, right? So we have a few organs inside our body, our brain, our red blood cells, parts of our kidney that do need glucose. But remember, we have the ability to make that glucose from protein and fat. But that number is probably somewhere around 70 to 90 grams. Then you have a baby, baby's brain needs 20 to 25 grams. And then because the woman's pregnant, she needs an extra percentage of calories. And basically they came up with this 175 gram number based on 2 standard deviations. The standard American diet, most women would consume 250 to 450, right? Excessive amounts of carbs. So 175 does actually seem pretty low, right? But if a woman comes into pregnancy insulin resistant, she really might need less than 175 grams. When you think about that, think of the way you and I eat, Rachel, that would be eating 50 grams of glucose with each meal, which is quite a bit, right? And then probably a couple snacks in there. And that's what the diabetes educators a lot of times will tell my patients. So that's a bad thing, especially if you come into pregnancy insulin resistant. So I think that people should really eat to their insulin sensitivity. If you are very insulin sensitive, I do have patients that can eat 175 carbs and they're fine, but you really should be eating to your insulin sensitivity. It should be very, very individualized to each patient. There's a couple studies that scare everyone away from eating low carb, and they're all rat studies. And they basically showed that there was some adverse outcomes that happened in the brains of these rats when the female rats were given a ketogenic diet in pregnancy. But when you look at them, they're literally 0 carb, no carbs at all. And we are not rats, right? So it's really hard to say that what happens in a rat happens in a human baby. And we have studies that show excessive carbs cause harm. So why don't we keep these patients where they have normal glycemia? Let's eat carbs to normal glycemia, because we know that the other direction does cause significant amount of harm. And I've taken care of many pregnant women who have been able to eat lower carb in pregnancy, and they've really, had all healthy pregnancies. And we know Virta Health, which is an online virtual diabetes clinic, they haven't published it, but they do have some pregnancy data of patients who got pregnant while they were in those studies. And we will need time for these things to come out. But people should not be afraid. Ketosis is very protective to a newborn baby. Babies are basically born into a state of ketosis, and breastfed babies utilize ketones a lot for myelination of the brain. So breast milk is very high in MCTs, which helps myelinate the baby's brain. So we've always thought of ketones to be pathologic in pregnancy, and they're not. They're very physiologic. And what people should know is that urine ketones do not correlate with serum levels, and a mom's ketone level does not correlate with a baby's. A lot of times babies are actually higher. When we look at umbilical cord studies, babies sometimes have higher ketone levels, which tells us that the baby is actually making their own ketones. So why would we as a human species, how would that ever be protective if ketones were harmful for a newborn baby to be making them? So So that's my case for eating lower carb in pregnancy. And it's hard because we don't have studies. So we don't have providers that are well-versed. They're terrified. They don't live this way themselves. So it will take time. It will take time, for some of this to come out, but I have no issue. The biggest issue I have is when people are in the middle of pregnancy, eating a boatload of carbs, and then all of a sudden go from 200 carbs a day to 0 carbs per day. That could cause a lot of electrolyte disturbances. So women have to be very cautious about that. Same thing with breastfeeding. If you suddenly make dietary changes, there could be a change in supply that could happen. There could be electrolyte disturbances. So you need to be working with somebody or, slowly making these changes and not doing anything that's super aggressive or super abrupt when you're pregnant or when you're trying to feed another human. And the other thing is I don't recommend fasting in pregnancy or breastfeeding. It's a short period of time in your life. You should be getting adequate nutrition and adequate nutrients. And because of the high protein requirements, I like my pregnant and breastfeeding women to be eating multiple times per day and not doing intermittent or extended fasting. So that's another big take home too.
Yeah, for sure. And on the point of protein, so that's something that when I work with clients, I have over the past, 2 years been taking much more of a high protein keto approach. I've actually always been doing that, like for myself and for people I work with. So is that something that you recommend more? Because we know that a traditional ketogenic diet is, moderate protein, very high fat, more to treat epilepsy. And I think that's something that people are a little bit miseducated on when it comes to, when they first either hear about keto or start it, they start piling down the fat, proteins kind of, not super important. So with your patients and with pregnant women specifically, you would probably suggest more of a high protein, quote unquote, ketogenic approach, right?
Yeah, 100%. So standard ketogenic diet was formulated for children with epilepsy because if they didn't have a certain level of ketones in their bloodstream, they would seize. Most people who don't need that therapeutic level of ketosis would benefit from eating higher protein and not eating at 20% protein. And, especially in pregnancy, because I just said we have an increased protein requirement and women are so bad at eating protein to begin with that using that when you're counseling clients and patients is to really prioritize that protein. Women see more success. I've seen more success in my own body composition by really kind of viewing my nutrition as more protein centric and less fat centric. Because if you have body fat to lose, eating excessive amounts of fat isn't necessarily helpful. Your body, when it burns fat, it has a choice between using body fat for fat oxidation or dietary fat, right? It has to use one or the other. So unless you are at a pretty lean body fat, you really probably need to eat more protein than you're used to eating and cutting back your fat a little bit. So, and I do take that approach with my pregnant patients and with my non-pregnant patients, because women need protein. And really the big reason is because when you're quote unquote dieting, right? Because most of my non-pregnant patients are trying to lose weight in some way, shape or form. And the advantage that the ketogenic diet has is if you can eat adequate protein, you can spare lean body mass. You actually have the ability to not only spare it, but sometimes grow it in the face of also losing body fat, which we've never thought was really possible. But we've seen people over and over and over, women and men, with DEXA scans to prove it, that you can actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time, which is incredible, right? Just to completely change your body composition. But they have to do that by eating adequate dietary protein and stimulating their muscles with resistance training, which of course everybody knows I'm a huge fan of too for women.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to talk a little bit about that. But in terms of what you said, because we know that ketones are muscle sparing, right? And that's actually what I showed in the study that I did, which got me into the keto world back, it was 5 years ago now. And we showed that, and the study was actually, a lot of people don't know that it was mostly women. So it was 30 participants and most of them are women. And we put them on a low carb keto diet, and it was a CrossFit study as well, but we did DEXA scans for all of them. And it was more of a high protein approach by default, because the only kind of thing we told them was to keep their carbs under 50 grams total. And the results of the studies, they significantly dropped body fat and maintain their lean body mass and increase their performance. And it was all shown on DEXA scans, like we did DEXA before and after. And so that just shows that, ketones are very muscle sparing, and that higher protein approach is probably another reason why they were able to do that. So I think that that's just something, I'm a very huge advocate of protein is queen in like everything. So
yeah. And it's important too, because, you bring up CrossFit, or people might look at my pictures and be like, well, I don't want to be that lean, or I don't want to be muscly, or I don't want to look like that. But I'll tell you, as you age, if your goal is to fight against metabolic disease, what are the three things that are most likely to make your life miserable? We're talking about cancer, cardiovascular disease, and neurologic diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's. Having a large amount of muscle mass is extremely protective against metabolic disease. And you never know when you're going to get knocked down, or when you might end up in the hospital for weeks at a time, or you might be battling cancer. And to have that amino acid storage, to have that lean body mass is super important. So women should not be afraid of that. And when you change your mindset to building muscle from losing fat, it does. It starts to change all your little habits that you have.
Yeah, 100% agree. I've been had this kind of new concept. Well, not new concept, but it's like this new saying, exercise to build, not to lose. And I think that someone said it and it kind of just caught on. And I think it's just so important for women to understand that resistance training is like your best friend. And it's just super important. And we need to, I think it's getting better though. Like nowadays, not seeing so many people on the treadmills and ellipticals, and more people, picking up a weight and stuff. And I think it's just super important, and something that still needs to be kind of put out there more mainstream, especially for women. But yeah, I love that. Super, super, super important. In terms of talking about women, especially with keto, and kind of talking a little bit more about hormones, what's kind of your take? Because just from my experience over the years working with women and being on, strict keto versus maybe implementing some carb ups and things like that, what's kind of your view on following a stricter ketogenic diet versus maybe implementing some carb ups for women specifically? Because we know women aren't small men. We have other hormonals, our hormones are more sensitive, right? And other things are going on. We're more sensitive to stress and things like that. So what's your kind of take on keto maybe being different for women than men, and what women might need to implement a little bit differently in that sense?
Yeah. So women are 100% different than men. Like you said, we're not small men. We are very complex biological creatures. Women have all these fluctuations that are happening because a woman's body is designed to reproduce another human. So the body is constantly taking a survey at every single moment to say, is this a good time for reproduction? And if it's not a good time for reproduction, it will shut down the system. So I love when people always say, I think it's my hormones, or can you check my hormones, or whatever it is. Yes, hormones are so important. But when people are asking that question to me, how do I balance my hormones? We have to remember that nutrition is a small piece of the puzzle. The other pieces of the puzzle include sleep, include stress, include exercise or movement, and include environment. And so nutrition is a small piece of the puzzle. So let's focus on that piece. So low carb and ketogenic, you're asking the question, should women add carbs in? Should we carb cycle? How many carbs does a woman need compared to a man, even if he was the same size, right? So when we look at this, it's very, individualized as to how many carbs a woman needs, because somebody like me that has a lot of lean body mass, I might be able to eat 75 carbs and still register ketones, versus a woman that's super obese and, has a lot of metabolic disease. She may need less than 20 grams. I do think that when people are first starting, I think that people should stick to trying to stay in a state of ketosis, because the idea of keto adaptation or fat adaptation, which is essentially teaching your body how to make ketones and use ketones as an alternative fuel source, can take weeks. So when you're first starting is not the time to start playing around with like targeted carbs and carb ups and those types of things. When you're first starting, you have to get into ketosis. You have to teach your body. And what you're literally doing is you're laying down transporters in the mitochondrial membranes. I mean, you're literally putting little Lego pieces in there and taking out other little Lego pieces. Okay. We see upregulation of monocarboxylic acid transporters, and then we see downregulation of GLUT transporters. So there's literally these little biochemical changes that are happening. So you have to stick with it. A lot of people ask, when am I keto adapted? Or like, well, how do I know? Right. And you don't know. You don't know. You just have to stick with it for a period of time. And like I said, it could be weeks to months. Now, after you have kind of gotten through this adaptation phase is when I do think that metabolic flexibility plays a role, especially for women, because the body is very smart and the body is very adaptive. And when we look at studies, even on just dieting in general, when you put a woman into a calorie deficit, if the deficit is a pretty significant deficit, after about 14 days is when that woman will start to decrease her thyroid function. So the body is super adaptive and it will just work with whatever you give it. So I think when you do things that are extreme for long periods of time, the body will figure out how to adapt. And I've seen this in women, sometimes they will go carnivore and they're like, I don't know, I just like these plateaus, right? You've experienced it with clients and things like that. They've just been doing one thing for so long that the body's just figured out how to maintain it at that level. So I am a huge fan of reintroduction of whole food carbs. For a couple different reasons. First, I just think psychologically, it can be very helpful for some patients. I do think that metabolically, it can be helpful for some patients. And I do think this idea of metabolic flexibility is important, right? We can't just be ketone burners. We do need to know how to burn glucose. We need to know how to burn both fuels. And once we have this kind of idea of dual fuel, we have the ability to utilize both of these. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal. Now, a woman's menstrual cycle is like the fifth vital sign. Okay. So if a woman is doing low carb or ketogenic or carnivore and you lose your menstrual cycle, that's not a good thing. It's telling you that this is not a good time for reproduction. Maybe you have lost weight really quickly. Maybe your calories are too low. Maybe you do need to increase your carbs. So I tell people we need to be our own expert. Just because Sally on Instagram has been under 20 carbs for 2.5 years and she's doing great doesn't mean that that's the right thing for Jenny across the street. So, I think that it's very individualized. Now, when we say reintroduction of carbs or carb ups, like we're not talking about eating a bag of chips and two sleeves of Girl Scout cookies. Because I know from a lot of experiments I've done, and you've done them too, with wearing, continuous glucose monitors and things like that. Not a great idea. Really, really bad on your blood vessels to do those types of things. But I think that adding whole food carbs in, especially I'm more of a fan of targeted carbs. So kind of earning your carbs and doing things like squash and sweet potatoes and purple potatoes and things like that around areas of exercise is an okay thing for some people. Some people are very insulin resistant, and that would be a bad idea. So until you've really fixed your insulin resistance, then it's not a good idea. Or if you're in that early phase of trying to figure out how to keto adapt or fat adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with everything you said. And that's kind of the approach that I take and kind of view is that metabolic flexibility should be really the end goal for everyone and the only way to get to being metabolically flexible is if you teach your body how to use ketones and how to use fat for fuel. And most of America has no idea how to do that because most of us have never been in a state of ketosis. So I think that is something also that, when you hear, the ketogenic diet being tossed around as just a fad, it's like, well, first of all, it's a metabolic state. It's not a diet. It is a diet, but it's the underlying ketosis is a metabolic state. And so I think that the only way to really become metabolically flexible is that you have to teach your body first how to understand how to use ketones and fat for fuel. Because if you don't do that from the beginning, if you don't become fat adapted, like you talked about, then there's no way you can do that. There's no way you can become metabolically flexible. And I feel like a lot of the kind of ailments that we face and a lot of the issues that are happening is because so many people are so metabolically inflexible and they're such sugar burners and they just don't know how to get into that fat burning mode. And that's kind of like my mission is like, all right, let's teach you how to become as metabolically flexible as possible so that you can use those dual fuels, so that you can, maybe enjoy if even a piece of cake once in a while, if you are not super insulin sensitive, and just kind of that more realistic side of things of life, right? Just like enjoying life in that sense, but to the point where you know what your goals are, you know what your individuality is, all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, how I kind of like when I love giving people visuals, because I think sometimes like I'm a scientist, right? I'm a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
like can sit over here and talk about MCT and GLUT transporters, but yes, glucose is a fuel source that we use a lot. So I think of it like the deadbolt on your front door, right? Every time you need glucose, you put the key in, you turn the lock. When you are just blasting and blasting and blasting that door for years on years on years, you start to strip the key lock, right? And eventually like the key won't even go in, the key won't turn. And that's what happens when you say people get metabolically inflexible, is now the body's like, okay, what do we do? Like the lock won't open. And so it starts pumping out more things and more things and more things to try to fix the situation. And if you don't have that metabolic flexibility, you ain't ever getting in the house. So, to have this idea to be able to go through the garage or to go through the back door to use ketones. Yeah. I mean, that's what a broken brain, that's why it works so good for neurologic diseases and things like that. So yeah, is the goal to just like be in ketosis all the time and like only use the garage? Like, no, it's not. It's to be able to go in all doors of the house. So I'm totally with you on that one. But I think when you think ancestrally too about women, because just to get back to this idea of women versus men is, and Paul Saladino and I kind of debated about this one time too, in the carnivore space, because I have seen women who are like very, very strict carnivores. And there are, I believe, higher rates of like amenorrhea where people lose their periods doing that. And I think it's because ancestrally, men went out and killed the buffalo and women foraged for berries and things like that. And they probably ate anywhere of, 10 to 15% of their carbs from, maybe berries and tubers and things like that. So I've not really been convinced. I get the idea of anti-nutrients and plants and things like that. Yes, for very certain individuals. Mm-hmm. But for the vast majority of women, I don't think that zero carb is the best thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm in the same boat too. I agree with that. I think carnivore, again, it comes back to individual, it comes back to what your metabolic health is and all of that. For me particularly, I've tried carnivore and I've seen better results in terms of less bloating, things like that, of course. But for me, I just love vegetables, so it's not sustainable in my sense. But I do think that for some people, it can be something that can be used as an elimination diet, or in your sense, you just feel better on it. It all comes back to the individual person.
Yeah, it's a fantastic elimination diet. I use it in my clinical practice a lot. It's way more simple to put a patient on a carnivore diet than it is on like a FODMAP diet, or because it just becomes so increasingly difficult for people to read nutrition labels and to know what they can and can't exclude. And it just makes them crazy, where it's very simple to put a patient on a carnivore diet. And even, we can see changes even in 7-10 days. I mean, it's actually it's an incredibly powerful tool to use, but is it good for, everybody all day, day in and day out? Probably not the most ideal, but it's not an excuse to not try it, but
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. I agree. 100%. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and chat about a question I get a lot. So in terms of women who are menopausal or perimenopausal, there's kind of this idea that it's so much harder for women to lose body fat or lose weight. And I've worked with a few clients and I get a lot of questions and stuff around this that, because you're in that stage of your life, that's just kind of the ultimate, I can't lose body fat because of this. What's your opinion on that? And like, why could that be the case or not?
So first of all, back to the idea that women are complex biological creatures. Menopause is brutal. Menopause is very brutal. So what happens is women go through puberty, right? our menstrual cycle turns on. We go through all these fertility years where we basically cycle estrogen, progesterone. And what happens is we are literally born with only a certain number of eggs in our lifetime. And as that egg count gets lower and lower and lower, our ovulation gets not good and our progesterone production starts to go down. And what happens is something called perimenopause. And perimenopause happens about 5 years before clinical menopause actually happens. But women can start to develop hot flashes and night sweats and sleep disturbances and anxiety and depression and vaginal dryness. And they lose their sex drive and they start to develop things like osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. So this is a huge, not just hormonal shift, but metabolic shift that's happening inside their body. And I will tell you right now, if I had a dime for every woman that came into my clinic and said, "Doctor, I am doing the same thing I was doing last year. I have gained 10 pounds. I mean, every single one of them, I'm doing the same thing. I'm eating the same things. I'm working out the same way. I have gained 10 pounds. And what is happening is that they're not ovulating regularly, or if they are, they're not making a good amount of progesterone from the ovaries and they're becoming extremely estrogen dominant. And if they're coming into perimenopause with existing metabolic disease and metabolic inflexibility, it's going to be even more brutal for them. So what happens is they start to gain weight. They start to gain visceral fat. So visceral fat is the fat around our organs because as the estrogen starts to go down, insulin resistance goes up. So as women make this perimenopausal, I don't care if they're super insulin sensitive, when perimenopause and menopause hit, women become more insulin resistant. And that's why a low carb ketogenic diet is amazing for these individuals. And I think a tool like intermittent fasting, even because there was a study that came out last year, even if they're not willing to eat low carb, there was a study showing that intermittent fasting or alternate day fasting was still able to drive down their fasting insulin levels by 50%. So if you're listening right now and you're like, I don't know if I can eat, that low of carbs, even doing something like intermittent fasting can be really helpful during perimenopause and menopause. And what happens too is they start to lose their lean body mass, right? They're not good at eating protein. And now they're starting to lose their lean body mass, which is further damaging their metabolism and their metabolic rate. So they're adding fat, they're losing muscle. This is a downward spin. So this is the time where, unfortunately, they have to hear it the hard way, but they need a low carb diet. And if they're not doing resistance training, they better start. And it really does help. I have had some women with that feel amazing during this transition. And then once women go through menopause, we could talk a whole podcast on it, but hormone replacement really does have its place for some women. For a lot of women, there are benefits to bioidentical hormone replacement, but menopause can be really brutal. It can be, but know that that dietary interventions can be helpful. It will not stop or reverse menopause. There is no way for me to put you on any kind of diet that will suddenly turn your ovaries back on. But if we can help you become more insulin sensitive, you will have enhanced cognition, which all of them are like, my brain just isn't firing. I can't remember where I put my keys. It's not like overt dementia, but it will enhance their cognition. It will reduce the amount of visceral fat that they put inside their belly. It will protect their lean body mass, which is super important for fighting against metabolic disease. And then if they need hormones, they need hormones.
Yeah. Wow. I love that answer. You hit on everything. So just while we're on the topic of hormones, I wanted to ask you a little bit, this kind of switching gears from menopause, but going to the topic of birth control. So this is another kind of question that I get a lot. And just from my own experience and from a lot of just women out there, you're kind of, especially when I was growing up, I was just put on birth control because it was like the normal thing to do. Right. For me, it was because of I had acne. So my doctor's like, oh, I'll just put you on some birth control to help with that. What is wrong with that? Why is birth control not just this thing that doesn't really matter, that anybody can just go on and your doctor can prescribe it? It's just normal. What's the issue with that? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of women and girls, in growing up in their teenage years, and moms just don't understand that it's not something that should just be the norm. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm super passionate about this. Birth control has its place. Birth control is amazing. Birth control gives women the right to choose when they want to have a pregnancy. Birth control has its place. And if you want birth control, then there are a whole range of things that you can use. Birth control pill is wildly overprescribed for things that are not related to contraception. So we use it for abnormal menstrual cycles, heavy menstrual cycles, acne, PCOS, right? We use it for all these things that it's not fixing the root cause. So if you need it for birth control, take it for birth control, but it's masking a lot of things. And, especially for something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is insulin resistance, you're harming this woman because by putting her on birth control pills deplete the body of B vitamins, zinc, selenium, and magnesium. They cause oxidative stress, so they can drive down your vitamin C and E stores, and they can start to drag on the thyroid. And then eventually, when this woman wants to get off birth control and get pregnant, now she's even more metabolically broken than she was before she got on birth control pills. So yes, it can be an easy fix. It can be a great Band-Aid for a lot of problems to just turn off the system. So people need to understand how birth control pills work. Combined oral contraceptive pills, patches, or vaginal rings, they work by basically turning off the system. By giving that low dose of hormone all the time, you're basically kind of mimicking, I don't want to say a pregnant state, but you're inhibiting those feedback loops, and you're basically just masking the problem until you need the system turned back on. So birth control is for birth control. Okay. It's not for those other things. If you don't need contraception, you'd be better off trying to fix it with nutrition, stress, sleep, movement, those types of interventions. Now, for women that really do need contraception, I want to talk about some of the side effects because, like I said, the birth control pill can deplete the body of these different nutrients. There is ways to help mitigate those. There's a supplement out there called the Other Pill that I was involved with that I did a clinical trial in my office, and I was mind blown by anybody out there listening that's ever been on a birth control pill. And I've been on one, so I can speak from personal experience. You just feel awful. Like you don't feel like yourself. Your mood's not great. It ruins your sex drive. You just kind of feel gross. And like, it's very vague symptoms, right? Like nobody can put their finger on it. And it's due to this micronutrient depletion that's happening. And this supplement really has been shown clinically to help mitigate those side effects. So for women that like a pill, this is a great option. Just know that you need extra nutrients if you're taking a birth control pill. Now, then there's other forms of birth control that are non-hormonal. So these are great options if you're wishing to avoid hormones. But the copper IUD, which is the brand name of Paragard, copper competes for zinc in the body. So you have to make sure that you're getting adequate zinc in the diet, or taking a zinc supplement if you have a zinc deficiency. And then there's progesterone only forms of birth control. So we have injections, pills, implants, IUDs that are progesterone only. Progesterone is still a hormone. The one in the IUD is levonorgestrel. And even though that is a more localized effect when you're talking about things like IUDs, which for anyone listening, I'm a huge fan of long-acting reversible contraception. It's great to not have a patient that has to go to the pharmacy every month or remember to take it. There's a lot of user error involved with contraception. It's a great form of birth control, but it is levonorgestrel, and it's a very androgenic hormone. And it can cause problems with hair changes or acne or inability to, I've had women who have had trouble losing weight, while using these forms of birth control. So you have to just keep in mind, what are your reproductive goals? Really talk to your provider about side effects that can happen, because I think that some people just really aren't adequately counseled on these things. And just know that sometimes there are other alternatives, or sometimes it is the best thing for you to be on. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be on birth control pills. They serve a purpose for sure.
Yeah. What was the name of the pill that you talked about?
It's called The Other Pill is what it's called. It's made by a company called Even Health. And it is an amazing product for people who are taking combined oral contraceptives. So
gotcha. And in terms of like alternatives. So have you recommended at all? There's like a device called the Daisy, which measures your temperature.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, and how
Yeah.
maybe you can explain how that works, like measuring your temperature and how that can regulate things?
Yeah. So we call it like cycle tracking or fertility mapping, or people call it natural family planning. There's lots of words for it, but basically the idea is that you are tracking your menstrual cycle and either avoiding intercourse during fertile periods of your menstrual cycle or using backup contraception like condoms or barrier methods during your fertility days. So basically, a woman is really only fertile for a couple of days in the middle of the cycle near ovulation. The egg really can only live for around 24 hours, but sperm can live for a couple of days inside the fallopian tube. So we really have to protect ourselves from getting pregnant during this time. So these methods that you're talking about are ways that you can track your basal body temperature or your cervical mucus, or there's different methods of tracking your cycles, but you have to have a very regular cycle for these methods to work. If your cycle length is like all over the place or you're missing periods, this probably isn't a reliable form of birth control for you. But for women with a very regular cycle, this is a great way to not only, use it for contraception, but to be in tune with your body, because there are some hormonal changes that happen in the first 2 weeks of your cycle versus the second 2 weeks of your cycle. Even your insulin sensitivity, even your metabolic rate is changing between those 2 weeks. So it's pretty incredible once you've kind of gotten in sync with your body. I think these methods are great. They just do require a very educated consumer to know what they're tracking so that they don't mess it up. But it's with smartphones and things like that, it's gotten way better. Like when I was needing birth control, it was like literally a basal body temperature, which was not your normal thermometer. You had to go to the pharmacy and buy a special basal body temperature. And it came with these paper charts that you literally like tracked your basal body temperature. And you were just looking for the rise in temperature that told you ovulated. It was like, and I'm not that old. Like, it's the girls these days have it way better. Yeah. Like your phone literally tells you like, don't have sex today.
Yeah. Isn't it like a big red, like stop or something? I don't know. I haven't used that, but I've just heard from other people, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of them. You just have to be educated and you have to have a regular cycle for it to be effective.
Yeah. I mean, I think it all, like everything just comes down to, being your own advocate and educating yourself and knowing that like, just because you are going to your doctor and your doctor's saying like, okay, yeah, let's just put you on this birth control. Maybe you're having a irregular period, or in my case, it was acne. And just, you have to kind of do your own research and know that just because, like for me, it was like, oh, my doctor said it, so that's what's right. Right. I think a lot of people kind of go through that too. And it's just a lack of education. It's not necessarily our fault or the doctor's fault, because it's just the lack of education. So I think that is huge. You have to kind of know the why behind what's going on. And that's what I just want everybody to understand. Like, education is key in anything. And I think that you definitely brought that point across throughout this last hour for sure.
Yeah. Be your own expert. Like, nobody should care about your health more than you. So don't expect your doctor is going to give you options, but like at the end of the day, right, it's your body and you have to deal with the consequences of your decisions. And I love to tell clients, like, you get what you tolerate. So if you're not happy with how you feel or look or whatever it is right now, like you are getting what you're tolerating. So when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, just let me know.
All right. Well, let's end there. No. That was awesome. No, I 100% agree. Completely agree. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I feel like I learned so much in this last hour. So I hope everybody listening people are just gonna be blown away. So I like to end with kind of a fun question. So if you were stranded on a desert island, what's the one thing you would bring with you?
Oh, okay. Well, my MacGyver brain is thinking maybe like an axe, because I could cut down trees to build a house or cut open a coconut, or I don't know, kill something to eat. I think about survival. I'd probably have an axe. Yeah.
That's smart. That's actually the same answer that I had Danny and Maura Vega on.
Oh.
And Maura said the same thing.
Yes.
I don't know. They both said something. I think Danny said a lighter and Maura said an axe so they could start a fire. But
okay. Yeah.
Smart.
I mean, I could just take a smartphone and call like an Uber, right? But
yeah, right.
what would human society do if they had to survive?
Yeah, I know, right? Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. Do you have anything I know you have a lot going on right now and so many amazing things. Do you have anything specific that you can share with us coming up that you're excited about in the near future?
Yeah, 2020 is a big year over here in Fit and Fabulous world. So there's some stuff I can't talk about, but I may have my own podcast eventually starting. It was supposed to start last year. It's coming, I swear. I'm working on a book. I'm speaking this year. I'll be speaking at when I was at Metabolic Health Summit. I'll be at KetoCon. I have a couple other speaking engagements that I haven't locked in. So I love you guys. If you see me somewhere, please come say hi. I love talking to all of you. I love and appreciate my followers and the people in the keto community. I think just the people just get life, like they just get it. So I love connecting with all of you. People can find me. I have a website, drfitandfabulous.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, the same page as Dr. Fit and Fabulous. So come give me a follow. We're doing big things over here. Oh, and I'm running for Mrs. Nebraska. So if I win that, then I'll be at Mrs. America in Vegas in August. So
oh my gosh,
all welcome to show up.
I will definitely be there. I'm in San Diego, so it's not that far.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I'm so happy for you. You have so much going on and it's amazing. And like you said, this community is it's a family really. Even, last month when we were at the Keto Summit Omaha, it was Keto Omaha Summit. I'm always mixing that up. Yeah. But that was just the atmosphere there was absolutely amazing. And just being, these conferences and hanging out with everybody, it's really just a family reunion. And it's everybody is there to just, support each other. And it's kind of funny because we've been in this space for the past few years and kind of got into it. For myself, I got into it when keto was just starting. So I kind of made all these friends from the beginning and I can watching everybody just build their businesses, but we're technically competing against each other. But at the same time, it's we're not, we're just family. And it's just a very unique environment that if you're not really in it, you don't really understand. So, you just got to get in it.
Yeah. I think once you're not dealing with being sick and tired anymore, you can actually live life. And it's fun to watch people living their lives, and there's room for all of us. So come along.
Yep. Join the party.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to educate us and teach us. And I learned so much, and I know that our listeners have too. So hopefully I'll have you back on another time. We can talk about all the other things that, there's so much more to talk about.
So much to talk about. Yes. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to that episode with Dr. Jaime Seeman. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Jaime Seeman and following her on Instagram, her handle is @DrFitandFabulous. I will link that in the show notes, and I'll also link her website and her YouTube channel. She's putting out a lot of content, a lot of educational info, and she is definitely someone that you want to follow. So check her out, and thanks again for listening. I'll catch you next time.